I'm Keith Dennis, and I'm here to talk with HAL MEIER, producer of the show Off the Beaten Track. We present those ideas which are not yet completely accepted by the establishment or the religious, political, or scientific orthodoxies. Today, the particular subject is a consensus view of the book of Revelation. To get things started, Hal, what leads you to this subject?
Okay, well, what led me happened a long time ago, maybe 40 years ago, and someone in those days was asking me to do a Bible class on the book of Revelation. And so, not knowing exactly what I was getting into, I said, sure, I'll do that. No problem. Well, actually, of course, the book of Revelation was a vision, essentially, given to John the Apostle, presumably on the island of Patmos in about 90 A.D. And like a lot of visions, it was not widely or well understood by nearly anybody, as far as I could tell, except those who were unusually gifted with a lot of ego. Well, in those days, one of the people was a guy by the name of Dr. Barclay. Barclay was a sensible fellow, I'm pretty sure. And but he used a historical approach, which was common in those days, and that is, the book was presumably given so that as an instruction guide to the early church. And so it was on that basis that he wrote the book, and which I followed. Well, a few years passed, and eventually somebody said, hey, why don't you do that again? Well, by that time, things had changed. There was a book out in those days called The Late Great Planet Earth, and they concentrated especially on the apocalypse, which is certainly at least a small part of the book of Revelation. And in that particular book, they were quite sure that this whole world was going to end pretty soon, and it would be led by 200 million Chinese in an army that would overwhelm us. Well, actually, that didn't quite happen, did it? And so years passed. Now, for the third time, I'm asked to do a study on the book of Revelation. So, okay, sure. Well, by that time, people were around and writing books who had done a lot of study on the book of Daniel and had figured out that they knew all exactly when it was going to happen. Chief among those, eventually, was a fellow who wrote a book, 1994, and in which he said, well, that's the date on which this is all going to be pathetically ended. Well, guess what? It didn't. So he apologized to everybody and he said, well, I've looked at, after he sold 100 million copies or something like that, he looked it over and he said, okay, it must not have been, I made a calculated error. I figured it out, and it's now going to happen in 2011 or something like that. So in 2011, what happened in 2011? Keith, do you know? Are you aware?
No. The Mayan calendar? Or?
Me neither.
Oh, okay.
Nobody else discovered what was going on. And so by that time he said, okay, after he had sold, I think, 50,000 copies this time, he said, okay, I guess I have to apologize to everybody. I have sinned and come short of the glory of God. Well, that's really true. So anyway, but you're getting the point. These people who have a lot of, I think, good heart about them, nevertheless turn out to be fairly wrong about their predictions. And so in light of that, I began to think, isn't there a better solution for all of this? Suppose we could devise a different approach. Suppose that we, in interpreting the book of Revelation, suppose we did not go to a historian, a church historian, and suppose we went to somebody, found somebody who was, and that's not biblical at all. What did the Bible do? Well, in the Bible, when they needed someone to interpret a dream or a vision, they found someone who's good at dream interpretation. Well, when did that happen? Well, it happened, for example, when Pharaoh had a dream. He went to his wise men and they said, I don't know about that, but there is somebody around here who is supposed to be good at this, and they found Joseph, who then told him about the 7 years of corn and so forth. Well, anywhere else that happened? Well, sure, Nebuchadnezzar had a dream. He went to his wise people, and they were unable to tell you what it was. So eventually they came up with well, we know a fellow here by the name of Daniel. He's supposed to be good at this. So let's go ask him. And then Daniel gave a dream interpretation. So the method began to occur to me that suppose we were able to find people who were good at dream interpretation in modern times, maybe they will look at the book of Revelation, or have already done so, and they will come up with a consensus view of what the book means. And then my problem will be solved, and the next time, if somebody should dare to ask me to do a study on the book of Revelation, I'll at least have my method set, right? Well, okay. So here are my criteria then. I need to find, I thought, 3 people who were known to be world-class clairvoyants. Modern prophets, perhaps, if you want to call them that. People who said or were thought to have special insight into the spiritual world, if that were possible. So I needed to find 3 people. They had to be 3 people who were committed Christians. There's no point starting off with some other religion. Okay, could I find somebody like that? Well, yes, imagine that. I found there were 3, at least 3 who met these criteria. They are Emanuel Swedenborg, a Swede of the 1700s. They include Rudolf Steiner, a great spiritual scientist, I think he would like to be called, who lived during the end of the 1800s and died in 1925, as well as Edgar Cayce, thought to be the founder of New Age theology and so forth, are pretty close, or maybe he matches that description to some extent. So all 3 of them had also written down. This was Swedenborg's book called Apocalypse Revealed. Here is the one done by Rudolf Steiner called The Apocalypse of St. John. And here is a third one. This is a review of what Cayce wrote down, and it's called Edgar Cayce on the Revelation by John Van Auken. So all 3 of these were available to us. We were able to look at them and read them, thought we had our method was underway. So what do you suppose we found out? Well, unfortunately, or fortunately, what did I find? I was looking for a consensus. They were all different. They were not only a little different, they were very different from each other. It looked on the surface as if there was no consensus at all. And these were people who were supposed to be able to look into the spiritual world and come up with the correct answer, right? And it looked like they were letting me down. It was pretty clear. How so? Well, for example, Swedenborg talks a lot about the church. In the book of Revelation, he said, you will see that there will become a new church. There will be a new world. The old one will pass away. There will be a new Jerusalem. This whole story of Revelation is the story of man's growth and development and change over time. Okay? and it's not so surprising, perhaps, that he comes up with that conclusion, because his father was a Lutheran bishop. He probably sat around the dinner table every day for 30 years, is soaking up the theological and certainly Protestant point of view on these things. And so should it be so surprising then that he says that the book of Revelation is about the church? Is that so remarkable? Yeah, the only thing remarkable is that it's not following my guidelines. It's not working out for me. For example, the next one was Rudolf Steiner. Steiner was very much interested in those days and when he was living in what was happening in terms of evolution, Darwinian evolution. That was hotly debated and so forth and so on. So, and Steiner was right in the middle of doing that. And he said, the book of Revelation is about evolution. It tells about how it is that we will evolve into, have evolved in the past and will evolve in the future. And his version, while it was definitely not Darwinian, it was nevertheless obvious that he was picking up the conversation of the times. The third one was Edgar Cayce. Edgar Cayce had started out his early life doing medical readings. He would lie down and he said, yeah, I'm thinking about your problem, and it's pretty clear that there's something going on with your endocrine system that's not quite right, and your spine needs to be adjusted and so forth. So Edgar Cayce, it turns out, says that that the book of Revelation, has to do with the changes in the endocrine system and how it is that we are going to evolve into the future. So one easy conclusion is to say what they're getting is not the spiritual world. They're digging this out of their own memory bank. And so it is that they are coming up with they're separated from each other by 50 or 100 or 200 years. And they're coming up with different solutions because they live in a different time. They've had different life experiences. So that would appear to be the end of my solution, right? Well, the only thing that had maybe saved me, or this presentation perhaps, is that in the meantime, I had become interested in mystical Christianity and in a view of the Bible that we can call esoteric. A view that said, well, it's a story about, what we're looking for is the internal meaning of an external review or writings. Maybe that same method not only should be applied to the book of Revelation, which these writers were doing, but should apply to their writings as well. What's the internal meaning, in other words, of what Swedenborg and Steiner and Cayce were trying to tell us? So it was on that basis that we went back into the discussion, looked at each one of them, given some guidance by other very bright people who had gone before and perhaps done the same thing, and then we came up with what we discovered in the end to be a common core interpretation for all three of them, and therefore for the book of Revelation. Well, okay. What was that common core? Am I now ready to reveal to the world? Well, not exactly, because I clearly can be wrong too. And then you'll just add me to the dust pile of all the rest of those who were incorrect.
So let me, just so I can, these three individuals that you've been talking about,
Yeah.
the lifespan difference between them is basically like 150, 200 years between
Yeah.
each individual.
Yeah, there's no there's no indication that they ever knew anything about each other.
So don't you then wind up getting a situation where you do have contextual, that I live in this time, you lived in that time, that we have different experiences?
And those personal experiences are affecting the way we are perceiving the spiritual life.
Okay. All right. Well, I think I understand a little bit more. So now you're getting close to.
What's the answer?
Yeah, I wanted to know what the answer is. Yeah.
The answer is, let's see. They say the book of Revelation tells the story of the growth and future development of the human self. S-E-L-F.
Mm-hmm.
What's the self? The self is the personal identity. The self is the I am of the human individual. The self is the I am because it is inhabited by the great I am that I am.
Okay.
It is, but it is a self that is growing back toward the great I am. And that is what you should be looking for in the book of Revelation. Well, that on the one hand, there is, in addition, there are many other common similarities. I'm going to get to them. But remember, what we're talking about here is the heart and core, I think, also of the Christian tradition. He is in us, and we are in him.